Erev Tov, everybody. Good evening. You can all find your seats. We'll get started. So Erev Tov, it's wonderful to have everybody together for our speaker tonight, Rabbi Daniel Nevins, who you're going to hear more about in a minute. Rabbi Nevins, we've been fortunate to have a couple of times over the years. We're very, very fortunate to have him back here this evening, as we really do, as this program combines really two of our wonderful programming initiatives that we have at Temple Beth Shalom. First of all, we know that we've turned our library into the Rabbi Lindemann Lifelong Learning Center. And along with that project, we're able to create a program fund that will create programs not only within the center itself, but also outside of the center in the spirit of the wonderful Torah that Rabbi Lindemann has taught us over the years. And the first curriculum that we're using, the first program we're using for the Rabbi Lindemann Program Fund is an incredible curriculum that came out of the Jewish Theological Seminary about living a just life, about how we live out ethics from day to day. And this talk from Rabbi Nevins is going to help us kick off that program. And I hope that you saw on the way in. If not, you can get it on the way out. We have a number of lessons over the course of this year where we're going to be able to continue this conversation about ethics. So after Rabbi Nevin kicks us off tonight speaking about Jewish values in an age of choice, on Thursday, December 14th, Rabbi Lindemann is going to be teaching about justice in an age of conflict. And then Rabbi 30th, surprise, we have a fourth rabbi now, Rabbi 30th. He's really the youngest rabbi. But on January 30th, this rabbi will be teaching about food justice. And then on March 22nd, Rabbi Wexler will be teaching about working with justice. And then we'll bring it together over the Shabbat and the weekend of April 27th to the 29th with Dr. Michal Rauscher, a wonderful teacher who's going to be speaking about IVF and fertility issues that is going to be coming back that weekend as well. We hope that you can come to all of these sessions and continue this conversation about how we live Jewish ethics today. And also I want to mention, I'm excited to announce this, that as part of the Rabbi Lindemann Lifelong Learning Center, we've equipped it with state-of-the-art technology that allows us to live stream wonderful programs that happen outside of our synagogue in Cherry Hill. And we're going to have our first live stream program that's going to come from the Jewish Theological Seminary on Wednesday night, November 29th, just a couple of weeks from now, where they're having a program that's called Can the Tribes of Modern Israel Dwell Together? That's going to be moderated by Chancellor Eisen, and will feature speakers Racheli Eibenbaum, the director of Telem, which works to integrate the ultra-Orthodox into Israeli society, and my good friend Rabbah Tamar Elad Applebaum, the founder and spiritual leader of Kilat Zion in Jerusalem. It should be a wonderful program. It's the Gerson Cohen Memorial Lecture at JTS. We'll be live streaming it in the Lindemann Learning Center, in the Rabbi Lindemann Learning Center that night of Wednesday, November 29th. There's a flyer about that too, and we hope you can come out at 7 for a conversation. Then the program will start at 7:30. Just a wonderful example of the type of other educational experiences that we were able to bring to our community because of our Lifelong Learning Center. And also tonight, we are in partnership with our TBS Bioethics Initiative, which of course began last year with the wonderful vision and partnership of Audrey and Yael Asbel and Jeff Kramer, Dr. Jeff Kramer and Jane Kramer and Dr. Greg Bannett, and the Stanley and Doris Acts of Loving Kindness Fund and Kent that enabled us to put together the Bioethics Fund. And that's because Rabbi Nevins, not only in being an incredible rabbi, is also really one of the foremost thinkers in bioethics topics in the conservative movement. And he's going to touch on some of those topics as well tonight. So we're doing this in partnership with the Bioethics Initiative. And like all of our bioethics lectures, as you can see, we are recording. And this will be posted on the TBS website afterwards. And you're welcome, anyone who wasn't able to be here or you'd like to look at our past lectures, you're welcome to go there and take a look at some of those conversations. And our Bioethics Initiative will continue with two other major programs this year. On February 22nd, we'll welcome Rabbi Dr. Julia Watts-Belser, who's going to speak about Beyond the Quest for the Cure, Forging a Disability-Sensitive Jewish Bioethics. And then Dr. Michal Rauscher, as we mentioned again, this will be in partnership, will be here April 25th to the 27th to speak about IVF and fertility and other bioethical issues that are very important and interesting conversations in our society. So we want to thank you all for coming tonight. We look forward to a wonderful program. Rabbi Nevins will speak for a little while, then we'll have a chance for some questions and answers. I'm going to pass it off to Rabbi Wexler to introduce our speaker for this evening.
Erev Tov, everyone. As you might hear, I lost my voice, so if you happen to find it, please let me know. You know, in many synagogues, this would be considered a great blessing, the rabbi losing his voice, but I know that that's not the case here, and this rabbi is going to continue on anyways, because just too hard to pass up the opportunity to introduce my teacher, my mentor, and my friend, Rabbi Daniel Nevins. Rabbi Nevins is the Pearl Resnick Dean of the Division of Religious Leadership at JTS. Included in that, he is the Dean of the Rabbinical School and the Cantorial Schools at JTS. He's now in his 11th year as Dean at JTS. He came to JTS in July of 2007 after serving for 13 years as a congregational rabbi at Adat Shalom Synagogue in Farmington Hills, Michigan. He also represents JTS on the Leadership Council of Conservative Judaism, the Executive Council, the Joint Placement Commission, and the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards, which just wrapped up their 2 days of meetings, and he just drove down from New York City with Rabbi Peltz this afternoon so he could be here with us tonight. And not only is he one of the leading experts in the field of bioethics, but as we're going to learn tonight, he is certainly one of the leading experts in the field of Jewish ethics more broadly, and many of the tshuvot, the responses that he has written for the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards reflects that, just to name a few. He wrote a response on the participation of Jews who are blind in the Torah service. He wrote a response called The Contemporary Criteria for the Declaration of Death, and also a response entitled Homosexuality, Human Dignity, and Halakha. And I'm very excited to announce, you're some of the first to know in the movement, that yesterday at the CJLS meeting, he had yet another tshuva that was approved by an overwhelming majority on the kashrut of cultured meat, also known as lab-grown meat, coming to a supermarket near you at some point. And you'll be happy to know that it can be kosher, but much to my chagrin is not parv, but in fact remains fleishik. I just want to add a quick personal anecdote about Rabbi Nevins. Rabbi Nevins is clearly a scholar in our movement and in the Jewish world. But perhaps even more importantly, Rabbi Nevins is the definition of a mensch. He is a constant presence in the life of all those lives who come in contact with him, and certainly with his students. And I certainly felt that during my 6 years at JTS, both in and out of the classroom. He followed us both in the U.S. and in Israel, and especially personally for me, as you know from a story that I shared on the high holidays. He was one of the first people that my wife and I spoke to, sharing during our challenging times. And he was also one of the first people that I saw when I looked up at in the chapel at Park Avenue Synagogue at our son's bris and our daughter's naming. And he's just that type of person who's always there for you. And as busy as he is, I'm not sure if he sleeps, but as busy as he is, he finds a way to be there for everyone and to do the work that I think all of his students hope to do, which is to really make people feel seen and feel mattered. And he does that every day of his life. So we're very blessed to have Rabbi Nevins here this evening with us. Very excited to learn from him, Rabbi Daniel Nevins.
How sweet it is to be here with you. I just feel very, very grateful to be invited to return to this beautiful congregation yet again. I feel surrounded by friends, and I don't know all of your names, but I feel surrounded by a friendly group, but really true and dear friends in the clergy here at Temple Beth Shalom. I know them all for many years and just feel that they are dear friends and people I learn from. And I must say that having Rabbi Wexler, Brian Wexler, be welcomed so lovingly into this community gives me much nachas and joy. I didn't get to see Becca and Gavi Meir this time, but I saw pictures from this morning, so I feel a little bit connected to them. And I think you all join me in wishing for Rabbi Wexler Refuah Shlema, that he should be able to have a full voice with you very soon. It's also great to be here with a trustee from JTS, Yael Asbel, and with Audrey and Sophie. Always wonderful to be together with you and with all the other people that I've been speaking with since I got here, including families that send students to JTS, the Golkow family and the Hollanders and the Hasids and Sarah Levine. I don't know if her family is here. Are they here today? Yeah, I didn't see right in the front. So I don't think there's another synagogue in the country that has sent as many students in recent years to JTS. And although I'll talk about ethics, I'm also always recruiting. So if you know, if you know any young people who want to go to a great college, this college is really a gem at JTS with about 200 undergraduates. And then the 4 graduate schools are all wonderful places to become a Jewish leader, a scholar, an educator, a rabbi, a cantor. We're really, it's wonderful to be here with you, with people who really value and share the same mission that we have. Okay, so we're going to jump right into ethics. I wanted to say as background that before I decided to become a rabbi, I really came to it through ethics, was sort of my pathway towards deciding that there could be a meaningful career working in leadership in a specific field, in the religious leadership field, in the rabbinate. I was a sophomore in college, and I was looking for something to do with the summer, which college students are always looking for. And actually, I have 2 college students. Neither of them know what they're doing this summer, but that's another story. And so I heard about this place called the Hastings Center for Bioethics up in Westchester. And I applied for an internship there, and I got that. And so I wrote that whole summer a paper on comparing Jewish, Protestant, and Catholic perspectives on withholding life support at the end of life. You know, at what point can you sort of disconnect life support systems? And every day we had lunch with ethicists and physicians and clergy and philosophers and people, lawyers, many people from different professions. And I felt like these were very important conversations, but the question was, what voice would I have? Where would I come from? Should I go to law school? Should I go to medical school? Should I do a doctorate? And those all were attractive possibilities to me. But I decided actually to become a rabbi, feeling that I would be able to tap into a 3 millennia old tradition while still being connected to a living community right now. And it's those 2 vectors, I guess you could say, the vertical vector of reaching back through thousands of years of wisdom literature to find insight, but then also being connected very intimately to a community that's alive now. Those 2 axes are really where the action of ethics I find to be most rich and most meaningful, and that's really what brought me to JTS to become a rabbi, and has informed me both in my work as a pulpit rabbi and then now as a dean. I came to this also with guidance from my 2 most important teachers, namely my mother and my father. My father, who I spoke about with some people tonight, is a physician, a retired physician, cardiologist who's written a lot of medical history, but has also been a scholar of medical ethics, was very involved here as the president of the American College of Physicians New Jersey chapter in a lot of the main legislation that came out of New Jersey and some of the court decisions with the Nancy Jobs case and Karen Quinlan and some of the other famous cases that you remember from the 70s and the 80s. And so my father has been a teacher of mine. When I'm writing on a bioethics topic, I will turn to him for help with the medical literature. When he's writing on a Jewish topic, he'll ask me to find stuff in the Talmud and translate it for him. And so that is wonderful. My mother of blessed memory was not physician or an ethicist, but she certainly was a woman who taught me values, and she was very much connected to Jewish ritual. And she, throughout her life, was always eager to take courses, to study Maimonides, to study Torah. And so I felt that between the two of them, I was able to find a balanced support. And that's going to be my lead-in to a verse from the book of Proverbs, which will then be my lead-in to the whole conversation of ethics. At the beginning of the book of Proverbs, we have this beautiful verse. Shma b'ni musar avicha, ve'al titosh torat imecha. My child, heed the discipline of your father and do not forsake the instruction of your mother. And it goes on, for they are a graceful wreath upon your head, a necklace about your throat. And so you've got this image of a child that is receiving wisdom from both of their parents. From their father, they're getting something called musar. Now, musar is actually the modern Hebrew word for ethics. Right? But in the Bible, it has something more to do with discipline, to be reproached. And in the Bible, we're told that a person who wants to be ethical needs to be willing to hear criticism. Right? I know we don't like criticism, it's a negative word, right? But actually, ethics is all about willing to listen when someone says you're wrong, right? Or why did you do that? Or explain yourself. Or did you consider your alternatives? It's critical, right? And so, musar avicha, right? The reproach of your father is describing, in this case, a type of parenting, a type of pedagogy, which is critical. But then it says, do not abandon the instruction of your mother, Torat imecha, which is more of a constructive type of learning. It's a learning of guidance. And I found a beautiful interpretation of it by Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra. He says, Torat imecha, ki ha'isha chachama, morah ha'derech ha'yishara livana. Because the woman is wise, she teaches the straight path to her child. Now, I don't want to say that men are always this way and women are always that way. That's not my contention at all. But there is this idea that to gain perspective and wisdom, you sometimes need a critical perspective and sometimes you need a constructive perspective. And many of us have had both types of teachers. Some of us can think to our own parents and say that, yes, I got this from one parent and I got that from the other parent. Or maybe there were other teachers, mentors of yours, who might have been more critical or more constructive at different times. The thing is that while this is true in a literal sense, the rabbis also understand it on a metaphorical sense. So on the metaphorical level, the reproach or the discipline of your father is understood to be the revelation of God. How do you know what to do, what's right in the world? Look in there, open up the doors, open the book, and feel the revelation, the Ten Commandments there on the front of your Aron Kodesh. There's going to be this great commanding voice. Listen for that voice, read the books, and you'll know what to do. So that is the Musar Avicha. Well then, what in the metaphorical reading is the Torat Imecha, the teaching of your mother? And the rabbis say it's Ima and Uma. The mother is the nation. The Uma, the word Uma means the nation. Right? So we have two ways of learning what's right in the world. Right? One is revelation, learning from God, but the other is community. Right? It's looking around at the people in your life and doing a reality check. Is this correct or is this not correct? Right? And if what you are saying is not resonating with the people, then maybe you haven't understood the revelation correctly. It's the tension, the creative tension, what a former chancellor of JTS, Dr. Ismar Shorsh, called a polarity right, in tension. There is this sort of pull between these two different sources of information that leads to wisdom and that leads to ethics. And that's a theme that we're going to come back to several times tonight, which is the sort of the tension between searching for precedent, searching for sacred literature, which is going to tell us that this is the right thing to do, versus seeking community and consensus. And both of those are necessary. If you only go for consensus, if you only do a crowdsourced morality, then what's to stop you from just rushing after the crowd, right? And following whatever is popular today, which maybe in 5 years people will think, what were we thinking? Right? That was crazy. So there's got to be a check on that. And for Jews, the check on that is saying that there is ancient wisdom. And if ancient wisdom is pointing in a different direction, we have to question the wisdom of the crowd. But if you are only depending on received wisdom, and it's taking you to a place that feels uncomfortable and that feels wrong, right, then you have to ask, am I studying my tradition properly? For me, I studied before I was at JTS. I studied for years in Orthodox yeshivot. I went to Frisch, which is a yeshiva in northern New Jersey, and then to a yeshiva in Israel. And at Harvard, I studied mostly in Orthodox settings. But then I realized that there was too much tension for me between some of my core moral convictions about gender equality, for example, and about intellectual honesty, about being source critical about my studies, and also about being respectful and appreciative of other faith traditions. I found that there was too much tension between what I was getting in my religious life and what I was getting in my broader intellectual and social life. And so I was looking for a place where I could sort of live in both of those truths together. And for me, at least, the right balance was at JTS, and it was in a type of traditional but egalitarian worldview. And so this type of tension can be very creative. Now, the best scenario, I think we'd all agree, is when mom and dad agree with each other, right? It's much better as a kid when mom and dad are on the same team, and sometimes that's frustrating when you really want to stay out till 2 a.m. and they both agree that no, midnight's going to be the curfew, right? That could be frustrating. Might be nice to play them against each other, but mom said. But still, really, on a deeper level, it's better when your parents agree. Unfortunately, it's not always the case. And if we can think about it, in this week's parasha, we've got the classic conflict. There are these 2 parents, Rebekah and Isaac, and they have 2 sons, Jacob and Esau, and everyone disagrees in this family. The boys have been fighting from the womb, but the parents each have their favorite child. What is Jacob supposed to do? Isaac has just announced that he's going to give a blessing to Esau, told Esau to go hunting and get some meat. And as soon as Esau lives, Rebekah says, quick, Jacob, go in and get the blessing. And what does Jacob say? No, Mom, that would be wrong. Not exactly, right? What does he say? He says, Mom, my brother's hairy, I'm smooth. Dad's going to know who it is. And instead of a blessing, I'm going to get a curse. And Rebekah says, I got a solution. We'll take some animal skin. We'll wrap it around your arm. Your dad will think it's Esau who'll give you the blessing. Quick, I'm going to make some meat, some nice stew, just like Dad loves, and you go feed it to him. So Jacob pauses because he's afraid that the plan will backfire. I would like to think that Jacob also was pausing because he didn't want to take advantage of his father. The text does not support that, but I still hope that that's something that Jacob was thinking. Maybe it isn't, maybe the Torah is saying, Jacob, shame on you. And you've got to learn a lesson, Jacob. So when does Jacob learn a lesson? Does he learn a lesson like that? He takes advantage of his father's blindness. Does he ever get taken advantage of? Is he blind? Not exactly, but what? Right, in the darkened tent, the bride that he assumes to be his beloved Rachel turns out to be Leah. So this is what the rabbis call midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Jacob takes advantage of Isaac's blindness, right? Jacob uses a garment to fool his father. Jacob will be taken advantage of when he's blind in the dark, and Jacob will also be fooled by a garment, a bloody garment, right? So you've got here a classic case of a young man who's got a conflict between his mother and father, and he just doesn't know what to do. Listening to neither one of them is going to be good for him. If he obeys what his father has set in place, then he's going to lose the blessing that he bought from his brother, right? But if he listens to his mother, he undermines his father, takes advantage of his blindness, and actually risks getting a curse. Not only a curse from his father, but also a murderous feeling of revenge from his brother. But I want to just stick for a second on this issue of him taking advantage of the blindness of his father. As it happens, we have a wonderful rabbinical student at JTS named Lauren Tuckman, who is herself blind. And she's written a lot of wonderful articles. And every year in Parshat Toldot, I ask her, I say, Lauren, how do you relate to this parasha? Does this mean anything different to you? She says, oh yes, I think about Toldot all the time because this is a parsha about blind people being taken advantage of, right? And so I just want to read for you a quote from an article she published last year on deception and its consequences. She wrote, Yitzchak's, when Isaac finds out about the deception, do you remember what happens? It says, Vayecharad Yitzchak charada gidola. He shook like in terror, right? So Lauren writes, Yitzchak's strong physical reaction, I believe, speaks to the fact that he was cognizant of his vulnerability and powerlessness to stop this cruel injustice. This is a feeling all too familiar for many of us who are blind or visually impaired. That playground bully who delights in disguising their voice as a test, only to laugh at us when we get it wrong. Feeling like we are set up to fail in a system that structurally disempowers us, despite our best efforts to do all the right things. The countless ways daily that we are made painfully aware of the inherent vulnerability of disability that living in an ableist society entails. So this is Lauren. She's being ordained this year, is going to be a great rabbi among our people. I'm not speaking tonight about disability, even though that is my section in this curriculum, which maybe you'll get a chance to see, but you have Julia Watts-Belzer, one of the great scholars in disability and Jewish ethics, coming here. So I'm going to not say more about that, except to say that Lauren is giving us a new insight into this family dynamic and into the feelings that Isaac must have felt at this betrayal from his wife and from his son, and the powerlessness that he feels. My reading, and I won't go too much into the Parsha, because then, you got some good rabbis here to talk about the Parsha of the Shabbos, but if you read really carefully, there's a possibility that that Isaac had a great plan. His plan was to make Esau feel like he got the best blessing, the blessing of power, of wealth, and of might, which is the blessing that Esau wanted and really needed, while still holding back the blessing that was appropriate for his gentle Jacob, the one who hangs out in the tent, the blessing of Abraham's blessing of the covenant. Imagine if Isaac had not been undermined, if he had gotten Esau to come in and said, my firstborn, Esau, I'm giving you wealth and power and might. You will rule over all your brethren. Esau would have left happy. And then Jacob would have come in and said, my beloved Jacob, I'm giving you Abraham's blessing, the blessing of the covenant, inheritance of the land. Jacob would have been happy, and it would have been a great scene. Unfortunately, because of his disability, no one really believes that this guy knows what he's doing, right? And that's one of the things that Lauren talks about a lot. So, when we're talking about ethics, we need to be thinking about systems that we are creating that allow us to see the wisdom that people have, even when we are having trouble seeing it ourselves. So, what is morality and what is ethics? Many people use those terms synonymously. Right? It's moral, it's ethical. And that's fine. But I've been told also that it's possible to say that morality is the difference between right and wrong, and ethics is the difference between right and right. It's about trying to figure out when there are two rights which are conflicting with one another, what are we going to do? That's much harder. Should you murder or should you not murder? Right, that's a pretty easy call. Right? Was it moral to take advantage of Isaac? No, it was not moral. The ethical quandary, though, is Jacob trying to decide, who do I listen to, mom or dad? That's an ethical quandary because he owes them both respect. Right? And so it is in many ethical situations. I'll give just the most famous example, the trolley problem. I'm sure you've all heard of the trolley problem. Yeah, I'll just say it very quickly. You know, there's this trolley coming down the tracks out of control. Brakes aren't working. And it's going straight down the track towards a car that's stalled on the train tracks, and there's 5 people in that car. And this trolley is about to smash into it and kill the 5 people. You're watching on the side in horror. Oh my God, the people are going to die. I can't stop the trolley. And then you look and you see there's a switch right in front of you. I wonder what that switch does. And you realize, well, that switch actually is going to divert the trolley onto a different track. Good, I can save the 5 people, except there's also a car stalled on that track, and there's 1 person in that car. Do you throw the switch, and the person who was not in harm's way is now sacrificed, but 5 versus 1, right? So you got the least suffering, the least bad consequence, right? So how are you going to solve that problem? Right? So one way you solve that problem is you say, there must be a rule I can follow. Quick. Yes, what does it say up there? Oh yeah, that one there. Lo tirtzach, don't murder. Right? So watching the thing happen, I'm not murdering anyone, but throwing the switch, I'm murdering somebody. I shouldn't do it. And the rabbis have a slightly longer version of that. Ein dochin nefesh lipnei nefesh. You can't push one life out of the way to save another life, to rescue another life. So I can't intentionally kill A to save B. That is a rule-based ethical system. The fancier term is deontological ethics, where it's following a rule. But there is another way of looking at it, which is sort of consequentialism. Or utilitarian ethics? What will be the best result for the most people? Right? And in that one, yeah, throw the switch. I mean, too bad for that guy there, but really, I mean, 1 death is tragic, 5 deaths is a complete calamity, right? So obviously, you can throw it that way. Right? Then today, there are also people who say, well, maybe you can't have a rule, because if you follow rules, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. Right? And maybe you can't always determine the most utilitarian result. Maybe you don't know enough to know. Maybe it's not so obvious at 1 versus 5. Right? Also, people are not consistent. Let me ask you this question. Does it matter if it's a switch that you're throwing or it's a person that you're pushing onto the tracks? Right? Psychologists have done this study many times. It turns out that most people, when you ask the question, the trolley question, say, if you could flip a switch and save the 5 lives, but at the cost of 1, would you do it? Most people say, sure. But if you were standing on a bridge over those tracks and there was a very large person next to you, and if you gave them a good shove, they'd fall onto the track, right, and stop the trolley, right? Would you do that? Most people would say, no, I won't shove the person onto the track. That would be horrible. But you'd flip the switch, which is the same result, right? So we're not logical about this. And that's the next point, which is that ethics feels logical. It's just about doing the sums, right? I apply this principle, I apply this category, and then it's all nice and neat like math, and I can sleep easy at night because I did the right thing because I followed the rules. Or I did the right thing because I got the best benefit I could. I chose the lesser of 2 evils. But then there's that ick factor, or that emotional factor. And I've been thinking about this a lot because you heard what some of my projects have been, but my new project, now that this one, thank God, was passed, right? My next project is actually about artificial intelligence and morality, right? So one of the things that's being decided right now is autonomous vehicles, which you know are in development, and there's a sort of an arms race that's going on now between some of the tech companies like Google and Uber and some of the big three car companies, especially Ford is in lead about this. But who's going to develop the first autonomous vehicle? And the autonomous vehicles will probably be safer, or it's hoped to be, will be safer than regular cars. All right, maybe not, but that's the claim. Yes, so they're in their beta phase, but the most dangerous part of vehicles, of course, is the drivers, right? So there are a vast number of deaths and injuries that happen every year with car crashes. Human drivers fall asleep at the wheel. Human drivers get drunk. Human drivers get angry and have road rage. Human drivers get distracted by their cell phones and all these other things, right? And so a machine presumably would not have any of those problems, right? And so there's a theory, at least, an aspiration, let's call it, that autonomous vehicles could be safer. And yet, they won't be perfect. And the question is, if there's a version of the trolley problem, which type of ethics is going to be sort of programmed into that car? Let's say, it's kind of a dark thing to say, but I'm going to say it. You're driving in your car, the one that you paid money for, and you're the only occupant of that car, but you're sitting in the back seat while your car drives you home, right? And it's a rainy night and it's slippery, and there's a car stuck right in front of you, and you come around the turn, and your car realizes that a crash is inevitable, and let's say it's a school bus, and there's a ravine on the side of the road. It's quite obvious what a utilitarian car will do. Sorry, we're going right? Because one death, the death of the owner, is better than slamming into the school bus and killing all those children, right? Now, if you ask people what decision should a car do, they'd probably do the utilitarian thing. Would you buy a utilitarian car which is willing to kill you, right? If that's its best option. I don't know, how many people want to buy that car? So there's been some conversation, a bit jokey, but like maybe when you go to the dealership for your autonomous car, you get to choose, just like you get the trim lines, you want the leather seats or you want the cloth seats, you're going to say, I want the utilitarian moral system or I want the rule-based system. I want the car which will be loyal to the owner, or I want the car which will do the right thing, even if that means my life is shorter, my road comes to an end. So these questions, engineers, and I have a friend who works for a company called Mobileye in Israel, which was just bought for like $15 billion, and happy friend. Anyway, so he's employee number 3. Yeah, anyway, so they would say, don't worry, it's going to be much safer, because the cars will all be in communication with each other. They will process data much faster than a human ever could. They will have the ability to slow down much more safely than a human will. They won't have fallen asleep or looked at the phone and all those things. So, and yet, these decisions need to be made. And so, for me, when I think about these different styles of coming to an ethical decision, it quickly comes into play when we talk about technology, right? When we talk about what moral system are we going to be building into our technology. I also have a few other concerns, and I'm just at the very beginning of this project. But what happens to people when we start delegating decision-making to machinery? When you start saying, I don't have to make that decision, the computer will tell me the right thing to do. What happens to our neshama when we are no longer involved in moral decision-making, but are simply following an algorithm? Can you have a moral machine? Or is morality something which is inherently connected to mortality, right? And towards embodiment? Is it possible to say that you can make a moral decision without fear? without suffering, an experience of suffering, without a sense of loss, without a sense of love. Okay? All of these emotional parts of the human experience are very much part of our moral life. And so there's a Israeli philosopher, although he's worked most of his life in this country, Amitai Etzioni, who has said that no, there's no such thing as a moral machine. Machines can follow a law or not follow a law. And if our laws need to be updated, they can be updated. But it's ridiculous to think of machines as being moral. The morality in machines is, they would say, it's like a passive type of morality. Right? So everything on this bima has been designed with some moral value. You know, that the nice menorah up there, somebody checked to make sure that it was bolted in properly so it doesn't fall on the rabbis on Shabbos, right? So there's a morality based, in the way that that's designed, this gas ner tamid. Somebody hopefully has checked that out to make sure it's safe to be flowing gas, into a space where people stay. Right? There's morality in terms of safety built into our machines. But we don't want the machines actually deciding which moral value is going to triumph or be prioritized in any given situation. And so this is the way that modern ethics apply. But in Jewish ethics as well, we have a contest between sort of the received rules, like the rule-based type of ethics, versus sort of the communal experience. And I'll give an example from this tshuva that just passed yesterday. As Rabbi Wexler said, unfortunately, I cannot give you a kosher cheeseburger. I'm saying it a little more dramatically there, but and so the question is, just so maybe you haven't heard of cultured meat. So what it is, and it actually does exist, but it's not yet at market, is that cells could be taken from a live animal, let's say a cow, right? And then those cells in a lab environment, in a bioreactor, would be able to be manipulated so that the skeletal muscles, stem cells, would be able to proliferate, right? And there are a lot of things that have to happen. They have to be manipulated in different ways. They have to be subjected to tension because muscle tissue needs tension in order to bulk up. But okay, so they do all these things and they build these little nano tubes of muscle tissue, right? Which eventually becomes something that looks, when they layer it, they slice it and they layer it, millions of these things, it can eventually look like chopped meat, right? And so if you were to look at it under a microscope, it would be muscle cells that look the same as cow muscle cells. And if you look at it not with a microscope, but with your eyes, it could look like a burger. So the question is, okay, the rabbi says it's kosher, it came from a kosher animal. We're not going to say it's Iver min achad. This is all the things. If you want to read my 30-page paper, you can. We're not going to say it's torn from a living animal, and therefore it's not kosher. Let's say you could resolve all those problems. Should you consider it to be meat or not? Or should you say it's like an egg? An egg, as you know, is parv. An egg comes from a live animal. An egg is a cell, right? An egg is a biological product, and yet it's parv. You can eat it with dairy. I like to have cheese in my omelets. Right? So do we say on a purely rule-based system that this new product lines up with this established product, cultured meat is like eggs, therefore parv? Or do we say, but what is the experience of people when they eat that hamburger? And this comes to this expression we learned called achashve. Like choshev is the Hebrew word. What would somebody think? They would think, I'm eating meat. Right? And if they think they're eating meat, then, and let's say, in fact, there are two versions of the hamburger. You go to your kosher supermarket, and there is both, Aaron's pastured beef, organic pastured beef, right? Grass-fed, all the fancy things that you could want, right? And then right next to it, there's this cultured beef, which was made in a laboratory. let's imagine they taste the same, they look the same, they have the same bite, they feel the same in your mouth, right? And you're going to say, but this one is meat and this one is parv, right? So there's going to be, in addition to the rule system, there's going to be the lived experience. And not only that, you might say, well, part of keeping kosher is knowing that there's basar and there's challah, there's meat and there's dairy. We separate between the two of them. And if you were to tell me there's a way of getting around it, we're just going to make the meat slightly different way, and now we can have the cheeseburgers, then you start to lose something that makes us distinct. Now, we have a taiva, we have a desire for that. I would like to have that cheeseburger. Full disclosure, I didn't start keeping kosher until I was around 12, so I still have some memories of Big Macs, right? I don't think they were all that good, frankly, and once my son, we happened to be in Buenos Aires where they have a kosher McDonald's, and he's so excited to finally have his McDonald's, and he bit into it. He's like, ugh. This is what I've been dreaming of, right? So anyway, but this is part of the culture of Jewish eating. And so when you lose it, then you lose some of the social value. And you might say, well, I'm ready to lose that social value because I want to eat what I want to eat, except that kashrut is part of what has kept the Jewish people separate. And that's why we are Jewish people, actually. If we don't have things that keep us separate, right, then we, at some point, no longer will be a Jewish people. We will no longer be a Jewish religion. We will no longer be this distinctive and really precious part of humanity. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the world just should be homogenized. But I think that the people in this room, I'm going to imagine, are still sort of committed to this idea of difference, not superiority, not in an obnoxious way, but saying there's something really precious about being distinct. And so the ethics are going to reflect both a rule-based system, which in this case, paradoxically, might be more lenient, right? A formal expression of law, and then also a communal experience, which might be more stringent. And then I'm just going to give you one more example, which was also mentioned, which is a case where the received rule might be more stringent, but the communal experience might lead to more leniency. So I'm going to speak about LGBT issues just for a moment here. You know that our Jewish sacred texts are heteronormative. They assume Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, or whatever you want to say, right? But they are heteronormative, right? And not only that, they're prohibitive, at least when it comes to male homosexuality, right? And so as a result of that, biblical texts, and upon that basis, rabbinic texts, so 3,000 years of our sacred record, are pretty forbidding, right? And with pretty harsh language, toeva, abomination, and with pretty harsh consequences, like the death penalty, right? I'm not talking about sort of a minor prohibition here. And yet, people, and not only in the conservative movement or the more liberal movements, even in the Orthodox world, there is a sense that there's tension here. But wait a second, are you saying that a whole class of people have no opportunity to form a relationship in life, to experience romantic love in their life, to form a family in their life? We're just going to say categorically that all these people need to be sort of ridden out of what's such an important part of the human experience? And so surely there must be something. Right? And for many years, I think those of us who were sympathetic to LGBT issues, but yes, also traditional, would say, yeah, this is a tough one. I don't know what to do. And actually, the first thing I ever wrote on this subject has been read by one person only. It was called teku, which is a Talmudic expression for what can we do, right? Wait till Elijah comes, we'll figure it out then, right? And so I said, on the one hand this, on the other hand that. And I showed it to my most important critic, and my wife said, if that's all you got to offer, it's not good enough. Just put it back in the drawer, you know? And so she was right, of course. And so it was years later I was studying Talmud, and I came upon this expression in the Talmud, Gadol kvod habriot shedochelo ta'aseh shebetorah. So great is human dignity that it supersedes the negative principle of the Torah. And I thought, maybe that's the key to this door that we're locked behind. Maybe human dignity really should be the key theme here. And what is human dignity? And we looked in the Talmud, and then I eventually worked together with two other rabbis, Eli Dorf and Avram Reisner, and we showed how human dignity is not just a nice idea, but it is a normative principle in Judaism that can supersede other normative principles. And so when you have a contest between two rights, the right of a received, revealed truth that we have in the Torah versus the wisdom that dignity is a social construction that we learn about from our mothers and fathers, and from our friends, and from our daughters and sons, and from the people in our community, right? Then we realize that in that tension, there is an ethical dilemma. And it's just like what I said at the beginning. There's Torat, or Musar Avicha, and Torat Imecha. There is this Musar, this handed down tradition, and then there's also this wisdom of your own people. And it is in the tension between those two that we eventually come to a new understanding, a new consensus. And like I said, it's not just about abandoning what's in the Torah and following the crowd, and it's not about just following the crowd without saying, hey, wait a second, isn't there a verse, isn't there a teaching, isn't there something else to complicate it? It's in that tension between the vertical and the horizontal that we're able to come to the ethical. So I'm going to end with that and open this up for conversation, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say or the questions that you have to ask. Okay?
All right, so Toda Rabba to Rabbi Nevins.
Thank you.
Can you give me a hand? And he's given us a lot to think about, and now's an opportunity for questions and discussion time. So Rabbi Wexler is going to be on that side of the sanctuary, and I'm over here. And let's start over here. If you have a question, just raise your hand, and we will come around. All right, we'll start right over here. Okay. Too convenient to say no to. Emily, go ahead.
Fabulous, thank you.
Thank you.
There's been a lot of testing and proceeding with AI in law firms. Yeah. And I wondered, as you look at this whole ethical aspect of AI, which is coming everywhere, right, how does that impact the managing of the legal system? Right. How far does it go, and where does it begin and where does it end?
Yeah, obviously I don't know. Where does it begin and where does it, maybe I know where it begins, but one of the great questions that's happening is how disruptive is this going to be to the economy and to the professions and other things that people do, driving professions, warehouse professions, but then even in medical fields, radiologists, they're talking a lot about how AI can be very good at spotting patterns and things that human eyes may not be able to see. Question is whether it will replace radiologists or help human radiologists do their job better and more accurately. And in terms of law, so AI might be able to analyze a fact pattern and say, well, here are precedents and that it might be applicable. I would hope that we're still going to be then turning to a human judge at some point, a lawyer to hopefully, because look, law is never a matter of just doing the sums. There's always going to be a judgment, right? And so the lawyer needs to say, yes, there's this precedent, I know, Your Honor, but I'm going to argue that that is not the most relevant precedent for this case. Here's another one that we should consider. And are we really willing to ascribe to artificial intelligence systems that judgment call? I think we're not ready to do that. I hope not just for our own economic well-being. So the most promising part of AI is that it will help people do better work. Right? And that's what the engineers want us to believe. But it's also going to put a lot of people out of work. I just want to say one thing. They have said which fields are least vulnerable to being replaced by AI. It's a little pitch for JTS. It's clergy. So lawyers, I don't know, but I think it'd be a while before you put a robot up here, okay?
Thank God. Job security. Yes, it's all good. All right, Rabbi Wexler over there.
Okay. It seems that whenever there's modern improvements, there always comes this fear, oh, it'll put people out of work. But technology doesn't put people out of work. It creates different, better work. And regarding the ethical issue of artificial intelligence, Isaac Asimov addressed these things
Right.
50 years ago. If you look up his 3 rules of robotics,
Right. And then there's a fourth he added.
3 laws of robotics.
Yeah.
And, you know, and the early science fiction books, I think, anticipated a lot of these scenarios.
So it's interesting. I'll take the second one first, but you're right that science fiction has actually been very helpful in spotting some of not only the technical excitement, but also the moral dilemmas. And not only Isaac Asimov, but even Star Trek and some of the sci-fi shows and movies have really been a great way, and actually sometimes by being set in this distant future in a different type of system, they allowed like 1970s and 1980s American culture to have a mirror back on what was deficient in our own society. And so they were playing a very useful role in social criticism and not just in imagination of what's for the future. But Asimov's 3 robot laws, and then there was a 4th he added later in life, I believe, to not destroy all of humanity or something like that. Again, those are interesting for us when we ask, well, am I as moral as these robots? Am I not hurting other people? For example, to follow the first one. So yeah, I'm looking at that. There is a wonderful book I read over the summer called Moral Machines by 2 philosophers, a guy named Wendell Wallach, who's at Yale, and a guy named Colin Allen. I'm not sure which university he's at. I think it's out west somewhere. But they speak about the Asimov laws. But the problem with them is that they are laws, right? And so if you were to apply those laws to some realities, you're going to find yourself stuck because some of those laws will conflict with one another. And he tried to prioritize, you follow law 2 as long as it doesn't contradict law 1. But that's not going to be sufficient, right? So for machine morality. And so in terms of AI is not going to put people out of work, I hope not. That's what's said. And it's probably true that new jobs will be created and maybe there'll be more humane jobs. Like there was a big article in the Times Magazine a few weeks ago about factories and how the type of work that factory workers were doing, which involved like picking up really heavy things and putting them over here, is the kind of work that a human could do for a while before their back gave out, or their knees gave out or something, and then they suffered the rest of their life. Right? So yes, you put that person out of a job that was killing them, and so a big machine that can pick that thing up and stick it there, but
You have to hire 3 people to fix the machine.
right. Well, you know what they say, if the factory of the future, there'll be only 2 employees, a dog and a person. You know what this one, the person's job is to feed the dog, and the dog's job is to bite the person if he touches the machine. Right? So so, yeah, but I'm not so confident that there aren't going to be a lot of people displaced in this new economy, people who are not well educated, people with high school educations who are not going to have such an easy time getting in on the information economy, but we'll see. Okay, other
questions? Yeah, Roy.
Thank you. I was thinking about the trolley enigma, and it occurs to me that it's too simple. So you're talking about absolute certainty that the person in the 1 car is going to die, the person with 5 cars is going to die. So what about situations where there's less probability, where there's a 50% chance that someone in the 1-person car is going to die? So do people talk about that, and are there any real-life examples of things like that you've addressed?
Yes. So first of all, if you're interested, Google MIT Trolley Problem, and on the MIT website, they have a video game which you can play with like 1,000 variables on the trolley problem. Like, what if there's a 50% chance that someone is going to go, or you're going to slam into a car, but you don't know if there's anyone in it, and all sorts of things like that. And so you're right. Ethics is not about certainty. It's about probability often, and that's true in bioethics as well. Already things have moved beyond this, but when someone's pregnant and the physicians say, well, there's a 50% chance that your child has this horrible genetic disease, what do you want to do about it? And these are terrible moments when someone says, well, I don't want to cause suffering, but I'm not sure I'd even cause suffering. I might lose life, and maybe if this child does have that disease, maybe we'll find a solution. And who's to say that even a life of suffering isn't better than no life at all? And so these are the things. So you ask, do we ever talk about it? Well, I think that in Jewish texts, there's not a lot about probability that I'm familiar with. There is some discussion of the treifa. A treifa is a person or an animal that's been mortally wounded and it's dying, right? And that has certain effects on how you act towards that person. So, I think there's this thing about you're in the middle story of a tower and somebody's falling out of the tower from the top, right? And they're going to fall to their death and you can't stop them. And you stab them on their way down, right? I don't know why you do this, but you're like, I guess you're trying to shorten their suffering. I don't know, but are you guilty of murder? They were probably going to die, but they hadn't died yet. They were probably going to die, so, that may sound ridiculous. And actually, if you study Talmud, you often come across things that sound ridiculous. And sometimes they truly are. But more often, what's going on is that the Talmud is pushing an argument to the extreme, right? And we do this in all legal systems. How far are you willing to go with that argument? And so that's an example where there's sort of a probability piece to it. But it's not a really big part of Jewish ethics that I know of. Yeah. I'm going to let the locals.
Are you just going to go with the microphone? I see some fans from Rabbi Lindeman's Talmud class seconding some ridiculous things found in the Talmud. So, if you'd like to learn more, Tuesday nights.
We know that we have a lot of problems
Yeah.
with defining who is a Jew.
Yes.
How does the halacha or modernity deal with this problem now with all the ways that you can create pregnancies and create fetuses and so forth? So
Okay,
who is a Jew?
Yeah. All right, well, that can go in many directions. You sort of focused on these reproductive technologies. Obviously, I think you know that for the last few thousand years anyway, we've said that a Jew is a person born to a Jewish mother or who is converted to Judaism through a process which includes accepting the commandments and then for a man being circumcised and for a man and a woman being immersed in a mikveh. That's the traditional description. But you've asked about new technologies. So what about surrogacy, for example? So a friend of mine who's a gay man recently became a father by having his sperm put through IVF into the womb of a woman actually who provided her own eggs. So there are different types of surrogacy. There's surrogacy where one woman is basically providing a uterus, right, for a couple where, let's say, the man and the woman in a heterosexual couple have provided a sperm and an egg, right, which are combined in IVF and then implanted in the surrogate woman's uterus. But in this case, the surrogate also provided her own egg, right? Now, and that surrogate woman is not Jewish, right? But so what do you do there? We actually just talked about this today on the law committee. In the 1990s, I think 97, Elliot Dorff wrote a paper about surrogacy, in which he said that it's best, just to be sure, for that woman, for the baby to go to the mikveh, right? So it's sort of so you could say it was a Jewish egg and a Jewish semen, but a non-Jewish uterus, right? But because our ancestors didn't really know the biology that well, they had an intuition, but they really didn't know the biology. They had this theory that because women menstruate, everything red in the human body comes from the mother, and because semen tends to be milky colored, everything white, like teeth and bones, comes from the father. You know, that was sort of their theory, but so we know a little differently now. But so even though the genetic materials are Jewish, we said that if the birth mother was not Jewish, then just to be sure, we'd go to the mikveh with that baby, and so that baby would be considered Jewish, the chol hadeot, according to all opinions. Right? Did I answer your question? Okay. Pardon? It depends who accepts
Depends
it.
who accepts it.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? Right, so we've got different denominations, but not only that, within denominations, different opinions. Not only that, you got the state of Israel, where the chief rabbinate has made all sorts of proclamations about who has got the authority to convert someone. And as you know, the state of Israel has not accepted conversions done by non-Orthodox rabbis and even by many Orthodox rabbis. And so they've got like a list of rabbis they trust, and it's a very short list. So it's very political with Israel. But here, you know, like speaking within the ecosystem of the conservative movement, I would say that any child who's born to a Jewish mother, and if it's not a natural childbirth, then who is converted in the normal way that I mentioned, would be considered Jewish. Okay? And then the last thing is the patrilineal thing. You know, the Reform movement in 1983 started saying that either parent being Jewish could suffice as long as the child is raised Jewishly. Interestingly, there's a stringent piece to the Reform policy, which could be that even if both parents are Jewish, but they don't raise the child Jewish, in theory, by their policy, the child is not Jewish. I don't know that they've ever applied it that way, but the conservative and the Orthodox community continue to use matrilineal descent. But still, I think even we, all of us, are dealing with the fact that there are many people who in fact are patrilineal Jews and have been raised as Jews. And I think that we conservative rabbis will look at them and say, I see you, and I recognize the value of your self-definition. And I don't dismiss that. But Judaism is a religion of rituals, and so you don't need to convert to Judaism. I wouldn't say that. You've always considered yourself Jewish. You've always been raised Jewish. But we need to have a ceremony to confirm your Jewish status. And that's what the Rabbinical Assembly calls the documents for a patrilineal Jew who goes to a mikveh, a confirmation of Jewish status. And there are even some synagogues which have argued that all children, like the whole 6th grade of the Hebrew school or the day school, should go to the mikveh as a way of saying that, you know what, in our day and age, there are all sorts of questions. Let's not have questions. We'll all go swimming, and that way we can confirm that everybody's Jewish. Maybe there's something to that. Okay.
All right. Alan.
So, quick question. Your description of the trolley dilemma kind of reminded me of something that happened, maybe some of you remember, in Israel 20-something years ago. Hamas kidnapped a soldier named Nachshon Waxman. Okay?
Yes.
And Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin authorized a commando operation basically to try to liberate the captive soldier. And what happened was, during this operation, both an Israeli officer was killed and Hamas executed while the operation executed Nachshon Waxman. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to think, what would be the underpinning, the ethical underpinning of the decision that Rabin took at the time? It was obviously a risky operation.
Yes.
What can you tie to? Which kind of ethical kind of principle can that be tied?
Yes. Well, military ethics is one of the hardest systems, and it's we did have Moshe who wrote the Code of Ethics for the military. There's another one. Okay, anyway, so there are many different ethical principles that come up in military ethics, and so one of them might be proportionality. So say a slightly different situation, there's a gathering of 10 Hamas operatives in Gaza, but they're in an apartment building that has, 20 or 50 or 100 other people there. At what point do you say, yeah, these 10 people are threatening a lot, and so we're going to take them out, even if it means we're likely to kill, more innocent civilians? What's the proportionality that would be? Do you say 10 militants justifies the death of 2 bystanders, but not 20 bystanders? There's this cold calculus that's done not only in Israel, but in America as well. How violent are we willing to be? Now, the Waxman case, I remember that case. It was an incredibly painful one. I don't know what Rabin's thinking was, but I would suspect he wasn't thinking only about this one situation. He was probably thinking, well, if Hamas knows that they can just start grabbing our soldiers, right, then it's going to lead to more abductions, and they can negotiate with us for concessions. And it's like the whole thing about, do you negotiate with terrorists? Terrorists grab someone's child and say, give us $1 million. And you think, well, yes, I love that child more than the $1 million, of course, it's a non-issue. And then you think, but wait a second, these terrorists are going to start grabbing children every day, and what have I done? I've maybe saved one child, but I may have cost the lives of many other. Now you could say, but wait a second, but this child we know is taken captive. You're telling me potential deaths of other children who we don't even know yet. Why should they be more important than one real child who's here? So these are some of our issues. You asked about Jewish principles. I would say one is Pidyon Shvuim. Pidyon Shvuim is to redeem the captive. It's considered one of the great mitzvot in Judaism. So in general, we would ransom with however we can. And that, of course, was the issue with Gilad Shalit as well. How many prisoners are you willing to exchange for one person? Or in the case in Lebanon of 3 bodies of Israeli soldiers had been killed. I'll just give one example. In the Middle Ages, there was a great German rabbi, the Maharam of Rothenburg, and he was taken captive for ransom. And he sent a letter to his community, and he said, don't you dare ransom me. I'd rather die in jail. Right? Because you ransom me, the next week they're going to ransom the rabbi down the street, then they're going to ransom, they're going to capture this one and that one. There'll be no end to it. We will live in terror. Right? I want you, my community, to be strong and to say it's terrible that you're keeping our rabbi in jail, right? But our rabbi doesn't want to be redeemed. So you know what? You should just release him, right? Or he's your guest. And that's, I don't remember the end of the story. I don't think he died in jail. What?
I think
he died. Yes, he did die. He lived in the 13th century, so he did eventually die.
I think the community.
Okay, wait, we're going to get some more people, I think.
Let me do 3 things. One is progress, additional knowledge. Your theme about homosexuality that I'm going to come to in a moment, and the concept of intuition versus analytics or versus facts. So let me give you the dialogue. When I was young, homosexuality was considered a disease. A lot of doctors, not today. I loved your analysis of human dignity and all that. We made progress. We've learned an awful lot. When I had AI in a moment. We're going to learn a lot more because of AI. So really, a large part of your theme here is that as time goes by, we are learning much, much more than we knew before, number one. And number two, this always reminds me of the great Einstein concept of as vast as the universe is, that is how small the knowledge of us humans is. So the real question, and by the way, your talk is great,
Yeah, thank
is where we're going. And as AI increases knowledge exponentially, are we going to be able to take advantage of all that?
Great. Well, I think AI will increase information exponentially. But knowledge I would consider to be something that's not just about information. I think we've all probably had the experience with our computers of overload of information. You know, it used to be I knew where to find the book on the shelf, you know. Now, like, where did I put that email? Where did I, find that file? And finding things is hard because there's so much. And what I want to say here is that, yes, the contemporary reality is giving us more and more access to more and more information. But the study of ancient wisdom is about perspective. Right? And it's the perspective combined with the information that allows us to get to wisdom. And so it may be that AI gives us more information. It may not ultimately get us more knowledge. It'll get us access to information, but we still need to train ourselves in order to see patterns, to decide what is important and what is less important, to prioritize, and most importantly, to know what relationships mean to us. Computers will never know what that is about, and so relationships that give us grounding, that keep us responsible, accountable to one another, and that give us a reason to live, frankly. That's the kind of wisdom that you're not going to be able to get from AI. And so I think it'll be more important for us to think about what is precious about being human. And part of that is making ethical decisions. Right. Okay. Thanks.
I have another question over here.
All right. Good.
Fruits of the poison tree.
Okay, yes.
Legally, it's not allowed to use evidence, even if it's to save
Yeah, eat the mic. Yeah, go ahead.
a man's life. You can't use evidence if it's obtained illegally.
Yes.
But in medicine, when you use data that's obtained
I'll repeat, yeah.
in an unethical manner,
Right.
but it could save many lives, then the question becomes much more controversial.
Right, so the question was, well, in law, evidence which was gained unlawfully, you didn't read the Miranda rights, whatever the issue was, right, is not admissible in court. But in medicine, you argue, even if information was gathered in a way that without consent, or in World War II with Mengele, with the twins experiments and things like that, it still may yield some information that could be useful therapeutically and could help save life. Right, so why? I guess the background of your question, or the assumption is, if there's utility to this information, and it can be used towards just ends, then it's the fact that unjust means can unjust means justify just ends, I guess. Well, I'm not sure that it's true that the Mengele experiments yielded a lot of useful information. I've read some analyses that said, conveniently perhaps, that his methodology was terrible, so you can't really trust his results. But it's true that the Nazis came up with a lot of scientific breakthroughs, which, as you know, the United States scooped up a lot of those scientists. Excuse me. Thank you. Hey, well-designed shul. All right, so I knew it would be there. And so a lot of the rocket scientists that came to the United States that helped us design our missile programs had learned their stuff as Nazis. And so, yeah, it's a problem. I think that in I can't really speak to medicine, but in Judaism, we say, Ein ha-mitzvah ba al yidei avera. A mitzvah cannot be accomplished through a sin, right? So no Robin Hood scenario. You can't steal from A to give to B, which is like that ethical principle I mentioned to you earlier, ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh. You can't kill one person to save another person. You can't say, I'm going to rob this bank, but then I'm going to go to the orphanage and buy new winter coats for all the children, and I'll be a saint. And so it really matters how you get from A to B. And so ethics will say, now, there are exceptions, right? Saving a life, right? So if you tell me that the only way to save this person's life is to steal a car, right? Someone's dying there, and they need to get to the hospital, and someone else happens to have left their car idling nearby. Can you grab the person, put them in the car, and steal the car and drive to the hospital? Well, yes. Is that stealing? Yes. But saving a life has priority over not stealing. But there are relatively few of those examples. Human dignity is one of them. And if you want my tshuva, which one's? I guess my electricity tshuva from 2012, which is a pretty big thing. It's an 87-page paper, but it gets into prioritization. Which values are going to supersede other values in what circumstances, all right? Okay, how are we doing?
Question over here.
Hi, I want to thank you again for coming.
Thanks.
I guess my question is, my husband and I have young children, and we are living in a culture and an age where on TV we constantly see those in power being deeply unethical,
Yes.
And deeply immoral. And as a parent to children who are seeing this, what do we tell them? How do we explain this world to them when we say, you need to be a good person, you need to pick up after yourself, you can't touch other people, your body is your own, or why we don't do certain things, and then they see it on TV and it seems allowed and it seems okay. And as a parent, as a Jewish parent, what is the answer to that, or what are things we can do to teach our children, our grandchildren, our students in our community?
Well, it's obviously very disturbing, and without being political, just to say, when we have public figures, and they've been all over the political spectrum, frankly, who've behaved in repulsive ways, in violent ways, in deceitful ways, with harassment and all the other things that we're reading about and hearing about, I think that this is a moment, actually, of clarity for us as parents, and for our children to hear that they thought they could get away with it, and sometimes people think that they're going to get away with something, but it's our job to find out the truth, right? And no matter how powerful the person is, the truth needs to be told. And if it's the most powerful person in the world who's done something wrong, that person is still accountable. And they're accountable to God, right? Because it still matters about being a good person. It doesn't matter whether, it doesn't say in the 10 Commandments, don't steal unless you're really powerful, right? So these ethical rules apply to all people. And although sometimes it's discouraging that people who seem to get away with murder, or get away with rape, or get away with harassment, or get away with stealing, or just get away from being a boorish person, right? Even though it sometimes seems like you can get away with that, eventually you don't get away with that, right? And then you have to tell the kids, and it's our responsibility to set a different example and to say that, no, we really do care about this. I think the one thing we Americans need to remember is that whatever tribe you find yourself in politically, right now we're tending to say the worst about the other tribe, let's say. But I'm seeing some signs of moral conscience arising, all around this country. And, I think, and I will be political for a second, I think Mitch McConnell has done the right thing this week in speaking out about Roy Moore. I'm not going to say that he's my hero, but I think he's certainly said, and the Republicans have a lot of motivation to just sort of be quiet and let their guy win his Senate seat and for them to keep their majority, and I do respect the fact that they are mostly speaking up against a person who is very convenient for them to ignore or to even empower, and they're speaking against them. So is it enough? Is it typical? I don't want to say that, but I will say that there are some encouraging things. But I'm going to give a different example that's about the politics, all right? The chairman of where's Mike? Oh, there you are, okay. The chairman of our committee, Elliot Dorff, wrote a paper, a first draft, so we all listened and said, that's very nice, but A, B, C, D, all these problems. So that's what we do. And so he gave a paper about harmful speech. You shouldn't bully, you shouldn't shame, you shouldn't do all those things. And we all agree, you shouldn't bully, you shouldn't shame, all those things. But then several of us said to him, but wait a second, what about watching a comedian who is shaming or mocking a politician who's doing the wrong thing? What about watching Stephen Colbert tonight, let's say? Is that immoral? Is it usher? Is it forbidden to watch a comedian who's going to mock and shame a person, right? Or do we say, actually, it might be necessary, right, to, in a democratic society, to have different voices that are challenging and even mocking, otherwise you'd have a totalitarian society. That it's a mark of a healthy democracy that we can have that contest. What about the Me Too campaign? Right? Are the women who are speaking up shaming the men who harass them? Probably, yeah. Are their claims 100% accurate? Every claim that is said by anybody on Twitter is going to be correct? Probably not. Right? Can you be sure of it? Probably not. And yet to say that it is always wrong to speak out in a way that shames or mocks another person is actually a bit naive. It's not picking up on power dynamics, and people who are disempowered, minorities, and people who are disempowered often don't have any other weapon other than words, right? And so this is where the ethical quandaries arise, which is what do you do when the ideal thing is not possible, right? And so, so you asked about parenting, though, and my kids are a little bit older now, and we have these conversations all the time. But even when they were young, and I'll say, when my kids were very young, I remember, actually it was, Monica Lewinsky, I think my kids weren't even born yet, but I remember one of my congregants in Michigan said, how can this immoral person be our president, right? Had sex with his intern, a teenager, really. Maybe she was in her young 20s, and I remember saying, so where do I go when a person that I was politically sympathetic to, but morally appalled by, right? So what do I do there? And that's the really hard question for your kids. What happens if someone who's convenient to you because they're agreeing with you on policy is setting a terrible example? I think we have to name the terrible example and condemn it, even if it's going to be politically inconvenient for us. Okay?
All right, so we'll have the last question here. Then afterwards, we're invited to the Friedman Social Hall, and Rabbi Nevins will be around for a little bit longer before we send him back to New York for some more conversation.
I'm good.
All right, Rich.
For people who are terminally ill, what are Jewish perspectives, not just on withdrawing active care, but starting morphine drips to make them comfortable?
Well, morphine drips, or any pain therapy that might relax the respiratory system and accelerate the dying process, have been the subject of a great deal of study, attention, in ethics circles. And the concept has always been, there's this idea of the double effect, which you're probably familiar with, which is that if a therapy is being offered to reduce pain, but it might also increase the likelihood of an earlier death. If you can plausibly say that your goal is just the treating of the pain and that you're not administering a fatal dose that's definitely going to kill the person, but it's about probability with the question before, then it could be justifiable. So that's the simple answer. It's not so simple. And in Jewish law, we often think about what was the motivation for something. The same action could be permitted or forbidden depending on the motivation. In Sabbath law, that's the case. If I intended to pick grapes off the tree, like off the vine on Shabbat, then I'm violating the prohibition on harvesting on Shabbat. But if I was just like reaching for something else and I knocked a grape off, that was an accident, right? So I'm not liable. Maybe I shouldn't have done it, I should be more careful, but I'm not liable. Now, when it comes to terminal health care, hospice care has become, much more common, and frequently that involves removing people from life-sustaining therapies. There are people who have said that you can't turn off a ventilator for a person who's ventilator dependent because then you're killing them. And in Israel, they would do systems where they would have ventilators that would automatically shut off every 12 hours or something like that, so that you had to intentionally turn it back on, right? So you could then say, well, I didn't turn off the ventilator, it just shut down, and then I saw that the person was dying anyway, and there was really nothing I could do, so I didn't turn it back on. This is a kind of formalism that I'm not in favor of, although I appreciate it. There is a difference between shooting someone and letting them die, right? But still they're dead, right? So, so one of the things we've said is, and this is a hard distinction to make, but Elliot Dorff and Avi Reisner, who cooperated on other things, including the paper I mentioned earlier, were at loggerheads in the 90s over artificial nutrition and hydration. Avi said, artificial nutrition and hydration should be called basic care, so you can never withdraw it, right? You can't starve the person to death. But Elliot said, no, artificial nutrition and hydration should be considered medical therapy, and like any medical therapy, it needs to be evaluated. Is it effective or is it not effective? And if it's not allowing this person to heal, to grow stronger, to get better, then all it's doing is it's not a healing therapy that should be required, but it's an extension of the dying process. And therefore it's causing suffering. And so we should look at that same therapy and say, this is not helping the patient, it's hurting the patient. And we don't have an obligation to cause people to suffer when they die. Now my father, as I mentioned, is a physician, and he had noticed, and his practice is mostly internal medicine, mostly geriatric medicine. He had noticed that keeping people fully hydrated in the dying process often increased their suffering. There was more fluid on the lungs, for example, more of a sense of like drowning almost. And that to be somewhat dehydrated as a person was dying was often more comfortable. Did it speed up the dying process a little bit? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe being dehydrated made them less susceptible to infections and other things. And so the question was, what is the motivation of what you're doing? You're trying to reduce suffering, right? And to give them more comfort, and you are not trying to extend the dying process. So this is a conflict. There are people, mostly in the Orthodox world, a guy named J. David Bleich, who you would call vitalists. There are people who say every breath has infinite value, and so give every therapy, and the person's dying and you've paddled them 5 times, paddle them a 6th time, and keep going, right? But most people, including in the Orthodox world, people like Moshe Tendler and others have said, no, there comes a point when you've got no realistic hope of an improvement in condition, And at that point, you should switch to palliative care. And if that means administering analgesics like morphine that might have this double effect of relaxing the respiratory system, then that's what you can do. And that was a really cheerful way to end this talk, wasn't it? All right, well, time for dessert. That's more...
That's right. We're really ending with dessert in the Friedman Social Hall, so that's the sweetness we'll end on. I want to say a big toda rabah again and a yasher koach to Rabbi Nevins for being here. And we look forward to continuing the conversations with you at our future sessions. Hope you grab the sheets on the way out, and everyone have a wonderful evening. Toda rabah.